Alrighty, hello everybody, my name is John, and I'm here today with the third video in the Dicecloud V2 tutorial series. I recorded this video yesterday, and it came out to be about an hour long, and I thought it was just way too rambly, so I was just going to re-record it tonight. I've also got a time crunch tonight because I'm currently cooking something that's going to demand my attention in about 16 minutes. So the goal of today's video is to get through 3 properties within 16 minutes, while also sort of going over what a property is and its sort of general, well, properties. The general properties that properties have. Today, after going over the basics of properties, we're going to dive into 3 of the most major and most important properties. Those are attributes, those are effects, and those are skills. I think actually we're going to go in the order of attribute, skill, then effect. Okay, so on a Dicecloud sheet, which I'll pull up here, over on your tree tab, and a reminder from the last video, if you haven't seen it or you don't remember, you can go to your advanced settings and show your tree tab to get here. This is sort of the skeleton of your character. This is everything about your character, and through here you can add properties by clicking the plus button and adding a property. And this brings up the full list of properties, minus references. That's just for library creators, but all of the properties, which are sort of the fundamental objects that make up your character, are displayed here. You can also add them through the various other tabs, although they are broken down into just the properties that are relevant to that page. So only features on features page, on items, on the inventory page you get items and containers. But on your tree, you have access to all of them. And if I go over here, actually, this is to a sheet that's already filled out with TLOE and some basic stuff. You can see that if I switch on organize, that all of these have sort of an hierarchy to them. And so I wanted to quickly talk about this. This is sort of a tree. And so you've got this backbone that everything's built off of. Then you've got properties hanging off of that backbone. And some properties are extended out a bit. And actually, I've drawn this in a way that's not quite so clear. And I would have rather I had done it sort of like this. Actually, that one's fine. But something like this, where it becomes more clear that, like, these are ancestors of each other. And so when you've got 2 next to each other that are on the same sort of level in the hierarchy, so something like Aquin and Common here, these are what we call siblings. They're right next to each other, but they have no ancestry relating them. However, if you have 2 properties that one is sort of indented below that, you can do that, by the way, just by in the organize. If you extend one down, you can expand the tree below it, and you can indent it just like that, or you can unindent it like that, or just drag it below. But indented, unindented. When you do that, you establish an hierarchy or ancestry relation between them. The top one, the one that's least indented, is referred to as the parent, and the one that's indented right below that. And once again, I'm just going to sort of fix this to look more like that. The one below it is its child. And so this sort of is analogous, obviously, to actual parental relationships and family trees, but it's going to be terminology that I use quite frequently. Now let's zoom in even more into the actual property. Properties themselves have a variety of characteristics about them that are necessary to understand before we can continue. I will put a quick asterisk here and say what I'm about to say generally applies to almost all properties. There are some minute differences that will be revealed in the nitty-gritty when we actually dive into the actual characteristics of each individual property. But generally, properties have a variable name, which I usually use camel case for. Actually, hold on, let me tab over here. I believe that there's here's a paragraph in the documentation that talks about it. I'm just going to read it. The variable name is the name used to refer to the property in calculations and by effects. It must start with a letter, and it must be made up of only letters and numbers without spaces, symbols, or punctuation. I think, from my own testing, again, grain of salt here, but I think underscores are allowed. If I remember correctly, snake case is a fine alternative to camel case if you're Not interested in using camel case. Again, and of course, you don't have to use either. It's a variable name. If you're making the variable, you can set it to whatever you want. But properties generally have variable names, which you can use to reference that property. It's sort of its unique identifier. If multiple properties have the same variable name, depending on the type of property, usually only one of them is really going to count, quote unquote, on your sheet. And we'll get into the nitty gritty about, like, for attributes, if there's two ones with the same variable name, how does that work? Which one counts? We'll talk about that. Then properties have a whole bunch of fields. These are things like their value, for effects, their operator, for features, their description. These are just sort of the things you fill in when you're making the property. So if I go over here and I say plus property and I attribute, I get all these fields: base value, name, variable name, type, description, tags, all these toggles. All of these count as fields. And almost all of them you can access by using dot notation. And what I mean by that is you would type the variable name of the property, dot, like a period, and then some sort of code to get the description. So for example, let's just make this an example really quick. I'll call this foo as our variable, and this is the description of foo. If I create this, and I go into here and I just type foo into our action bar to evaluate it, comes up with 0. I don't talk about what that means, that 0, but let's say I wanted to pull the description. I could do foo.description, and now it pulls that string out of it. So all properties have this sort of plethora of fields that you can fill out, and you can pull out the things you type into those fields using dot syntax. Okay, let's see. Is there anything else I would like to cover? Oh yeah, tags. Almost all properties, and I think at this point every property has this tags field. Tags are alternate ways to target properties. The primary way of targeting properties is by their variable name. That's unique. Tag targeting applies to groups. Well, I was talking about earlier, with if two things have the same variable name, there's going to be sort of these edge cases, these rules about which one applies. Generally having to do, by the way, with tree order, which one is highest or lowest in the tree. With tags, plenty of things can have the same tags with no issue. And what you can do with tags is you can tag target, by which I mean you can affect large groups of properties all at the same time, so long as they have the same tag. So that's an important concept to understand. Also, by the way, with tags, because properties can have multiple tags but only one variable name, you can do fun Boolean logic with tag, and we'll get into this when we get into effects towards the end of the video. But continuing on, let's talk about our first type of property. The first type of property we're covering today is attributes. I've already spawned one in here, but we're going to go back and pull up this. Okay. Attributes add variables to the character sheets. It's the way that we actually store numerical values. Attributes can be targeted by effect properties, which can change their total value in a non-destructive way. For example, if a class level gives you an ability score of +2 strength when it's taken, instead of directly editing the strength attribute, you could add an effect to the class level that adds 2 to strength. The total value of strength will increase by 2, and it will show a record of that ability score increase and where it came from. And this is one of the primary sort of motifs that you'll see throughout Dicecloud, is that Dicecloud is designed to be auditable. And what I mean by that is if I go over here... Okay, we're back. Apologies, I realized that this showcase sheet was a bad example, and I wanted to show this one instead. This one, we've got +1 dexterity for some reason. Why? Well, because I'm an awakened rat, and the awakened rat is setting that. And I can see that very clearly. And if I got rid of this, well, it'd all go back to 10. And if I wanted to see maybe why my speed is 30, I click on this. Well, it's because that's just its base value from being human. And I can see that's from being human, not from an item, not a combination of multiple things. It's because I'm human. The whole point of this is that Dicecloud is auditable. You can always see where everything comes from just by clicking on that thing. Okay. Point is, though, back to attributes, they can be changed by effects. Attributes, skills, and effects are sort of the core properties of Dicecloud's creature engine. I'd like to, before we get into too much more, go over the concept of damage. So I'm going to set this to a resource really quick, and I'll talk about more of this in a bit. And I'm going to set this to 20. We're going to call it foo and just stick with foo because it's easy. Click create, and stats are going to show up on your stats. I'm sorry, attributes are going to show up on your stats page. So here we've got our attribute. We called it foo with a capital F, and this is what the name field does. It's just what it displays. If we wanted to actually call that, I couldn't use its display name. That doesn't make any sense to the engine. What it does expect is the variable name. Now, all attributes have this concept of damage associated with them, which is just that they have a current value and a maximum value, even if that's not always shown. Some types of attributes, for example, if we were to switch this over to a stat, only show the current value. You can't actually see the total value on your screen right now, which is why I wanted to make this a resource. All of these types, by the way, are sort of just reskins of the same basic concept. Attributes are numbers. That's all they're doing, is they're storing numerical values on your sheet. But it's important to understand the nuances involved with these numbers. So all of them have this total value and this current value. And with a property like a resource, it's really easy to change that. You get these nice arrows where you can change that. But this number now has multiple numbers associated with it. Well, it's got 16, its current value. It's got 20, its total value. 4 is a number. That's how much damage it's taken. And also, let's say if we wanted to make this an ability score, well, we've also got this modifier here. So how do we access all of those? Well, you use dot notation that I introduced earlier. Let's change this back to resource. Foo. So if I just type the variable name, it's going to default to the current value. This is identical to typing dot value after it. If you wanted to get the total value, you'd do dot total. If you wanted to get the damage, you'd do dot damage. And if we set this back up to 20, and you change it over to an ability score, if I wanted to get that +5 from being an ability score, hop over here, I look at my strength +0, showcase sheet, let's say over here, my dexterity, I want that +3. Well, dexterity, 16, dot modifier, there's that +3. Charisma, dot modifier, there's that -1. Okay, now we can go over a bit more onto the other fields. Base value, I kind of just skipped over this. What is base value? This is the number that all of the calculations are going to be based off of. In an equation, it's the one on the furthest left. Then all of the operations and effects are going to be applied to it. And it's important to understand base value because you can reset the base value with other things. When we get over to effects, we're going to see that one of the operations you can do is you can set the base value of something. So generally, how this works, if multiple things have the same base value, be that effects, be that attributes with the same variable name, the one that has the highest base value will apply. So over here we've got foo with a base value of 20, and we've got foo with a base value of 2. Even though the one with the base value of 2 is lower on the tree, like spatially, the one above it has a higher base value, and thus that's the one that applies. Why the spatial positioning of foo matters is because of the display name. So both of these have the same variable name, but if I change their display name, even though this one has the higher base value, this one has the same variable name, and it's lower on the tree spatially, which means that this inherits that name. If I were to swap these, now you see that it's inheriting the name of the one that's lowest spatially on the tree. But remember, the highest base value is going to be the one that applies. Okay, next up, we've got name. We talked about that. Display name. Variable name. We talked about this. This is common to a lot of properties. Type we're going to skip over temporarily. Description. This is what you'll see here. Test. This is what you'll see when you'll click on it. Never mind. Okay. Interesting. Is that just because it's an ability score? Oh, no, that's because, and I'm glad I showed this, that's because it's higher on the tree. And these have the same variable name. And so this one inherits the description and name fields. If I swap these, then you'll see test, test, test. There it is. Okay. I actually didn't know that it also inherited the description. I thought it only inherited the name. Turns out it does both. Now we both know. Continuing onwards. By the way, the description field is a bracketed formula field. So I could do foo in here, and then I could also do parentheses foo. Swap these again. Bring it over here, and you can see when I click on it, the first one doesn't evaluate, it's just a string, but when I put it in brackets, it does evaluate. It gives me that 20. All of the other fields in here, or at least value and, never mind, it's just value. The value field in here is a innate formula field. So you can type an equation in there, you can use other variable names in there, and they will all evaluate out without the need for brackets. Okay, in advanced, we've got a whole bunch of things that are pretty evident. Allow decimal values allows you to type decimal values in here. Can be damaged into negative, lets it go beneath 0. Can be incremented above total, lets the damage, and again, this is that concept of damage I introduced earlier, lets the damage go above the base value. Hide when total is 0 just means that when the base value, or after the application of effects to the base value, if that number comes out to be 0, it's going to still exist on your sheet, it's just not going to show up here. So I can show that by doing this, and this, and now we can see over here, sorry, this one now has a higher one. We're just going to change this to bar, so it's more obvious. Bar is showing, foo is not. If I go over here and change this back to 1, you'll see we see both. If I wanted to do when value is 0, and then I made this a resource, then when it goes down to 0, it disappears. It still exists. You'll just need to go back here and change the value back up, or sorry, change the damage back up so that it reappears. Generally, this is going to be used for things like health bars, or if you wanted to be super clean about your stats page and have resources disappear until you've rested. Speaking of, the last thing we've got here is a reset. If it resets on a short rest or a long rest, let's say we slept, comes back, resets the damage to 0, making the value equal to the total. Okay, now we're going to speed through the types. First type, ability score. Should be pretty evident. These are things like strength, dexterity, charisma. They've got a modifier that you can access, and when you click on them, you can roll that. Cool. Next up, oh, and also they all appear in the same sort of block. Although, asterisk, apparently next update we're going to be able to have more granular control over how these blocks are formed. So this might not be the case, but as of whatever date it is, it's the 13th of November, that is true. Let's see, next up we've got stat. This is for things like speed, swimming speed, armor class, 1. All of these are just numbers. They're just numbers. You can't roll them, they just appear. You can access them, they can take damage just like every other attribute. Again, these are just sort of reskins of the same thing. At their core, attributes are just numbers. That's a stat. Next up, we've got modifiers. These are things like proficiency bonus and initiative. They just usually add a plus or minus in front of them, and they let you roll it. There you go. Next up, we've got hit dice. This gives you an additional field called hit dice size, which again is targetable via tag targeting. Or sorry, via dot notation. This is essentially what you think of when you think of hit dice. It's a counter. It does have a roller next to it, so you can use them. It's got a special property about it. In your advanced settings, you've got hit dice reset multiplier. This defaults to 0.5, which essentially means that it's going to multiply, or it's the fraction of your hit dice that are reset on a long rest. Because as per 5e rules, you actually only regain half of your hit dice per long rest, rounded up. So if I long rested now, I'd get my 1 back. If I had 2, let's set this up to 2. Spend all of them, long rested. Oh, it's rounded down. That's interesting. I'm not sure exactly on the rules. I'm just going to assume it works correctly, and if it doesn't, it's a bug, and it will be fixed. Long resting again brings me up to 2. Long resting again brings me up to 3. Fantastic. This +1. What is this +1? Where is that coming from? There's no field in here that gives me +1. This is a special thing innate to hit dice, and it's one of the assumptions. There are very few of these, but there are some. Dicecloud will assume that you have a variable called Constitution somewhere on your sheet. In this one, we have it here, and it will add the dot modifier field of Constitution to all of your hit dice. It's very 5e centric. It's one of those weird edge cases, but it's just going to assume you have a Constitution variable, or a Constitution ability score somewhere on your sheet. Continuing on, health bar. This is a health bar. It can be damaged. It's got some cool coloring effects. It has a bloodied color, so if you go down past half your maximum, it changes color, and then it tweens into a different color for being empty. That's health bars. Health bars also have some specific properties associated with them. Health bar settings. Here's your tweening, your coloring. Damage order and healing order. These are just sort of weights for when you take damage or when you get healing. Which bars get healed first? Which ones get damaged first? If the bars just ignore damage entirely. And whether or not damage overflows when they run out of health. Past health bar, we've got resources. Resources are for things like, I don't have any on here, wild shape uses. I usually use them for channel divinity, key points, rages, all of these things where you can have something out of something. Again, important to understand, these are all just reskins of the same things. All attributes are just numbers. But here, it's just a method where you can gain and lose amounts of something. After resources, we've got spell slots. These are almost identical to resources, except they get a cool little dot that can be filled and lost, and if you go over, I think, like 7 or 8 of them, they just turn into almost identically a resource, and I can show that, because if I click on this, and instead of this large array, I just say I have 100 first level spells. It just goes to 100 out of 100. The big thing about spell slots is that you need to specify a spell slot level. This is a formula field. If you want, do I have let's see, do I have a warlock I can pull up? I'm not sure. Piero's a sorcerer. Do I have any warlocks? I think Akanta is a warlock. If I pull up pack spell slots, you can see I'm using a formula to determine the spell slot level. They're all formulas. It's formulas all the way down. But if you don't want to just type a number, if your spell slots change, if you've got a weird homebrew where the spell slots change as you level up, you can type a formula in there. But you won't be able to cast spells if you don't type a number in there. It's really necessary that you put the level of the spell slot in there. Otherwise, they're just sort of decorative. After spell slot level, we've got utilities. Utilities, just like every other attribute, are just a number. The big thing about utilities, you can't see them. They're invisible. They exist. If I type foo in here, I still get my 2, even though that's not anywhere I can see on my entire sheet. Utilities we use a lot in library development, because again, attributes are just variables. It's how we preserve numerical values throughout everything, throughout Dicecloud. I'm just going to quickly look. I've been recording for 26 minutes. My dinner finished cooking 10 minutes ago, so I'm going to really speed run through the last part of this. Attributes, I think, are by far the biggest chunk of all of this. Next up are skills. Skill. Just like attributes, they've got a variable name. Just like every property, they've got tags. They've also got types, abilities, names. Name and description, you saw in attributes, so it's the exact same thing here. What are skills? Skills represent, again, it's sort of a more 5e-centric thing. They represent things that the creature can be proficient in. They can have their values or behavior modified by effects, and their proficiencies modified by proficiency properties. Name, variable name, you're already familiar with. Ability. This is what ability score that the basis for that check is made. If you're familiar with 5e, you get a list of skills and they inherit the modifier of certain abilities. Nature is based off of intelligence. And so in here, I have ability, intelligence, and it's drawing the dot modifier property of this intelligence over here, an intelligence attribute. Skills also have this little thing next to them, which tells you if you're proficient, half proficient rounded down, half proficient rounded up, or expert double proficient. And that just adds whatever your proficiency bonus is. Aha! Asterisk. Just like hit dice, Dicecloud makes another assumption here. It assumes you have a property, a modifier property, with the variable name proficiency bonus in camel case. If you don't, it won't know what to do. And adding proficiency just won't really do anything. Next up, we've got the type. You've got skills, saves, checks, tools, weapons, armors, language, and utility. There is basically no meaningful difference between these. It's just what column they appear in. They're all identical. Aesthetically, you can't roll weapons, armors, tools, languages, and utilities. Utilities are just hidden, just like in the attribute section. But saving throws and skills, essentially the same. I believe, if I recall correctly, let's see, do we have any information on this? Doesn't look like we have it written down anywhere. I believe that saving throws inherently have the tag save on it, or saving throw in camel case, and skills automatically have the tag skill associated with them. I think in TLOE we manually defined that as well. We called them ability checks here. I'm not 100% certain on this. Take this with a grain of salt, but I think that skills, when you set their type, automatically get a certain tag associated with them. That's skills. One thing I did want to specifically mention, just like every other property, you can use dot notation to parse into them. If I did Orin language, it returned 2. And it returns 2 because it's pulling out the proficiency property, which I have a +2 because I have a +2 proficiency bonus. If I did religion, I'd get 3. That's its modifier. One thing I wanted to point out, though, was religion dot proficiency. This gives me a 1 because I am proficient in it. If I did stealth dot proficiency, I'd get 0 because I'm not proficient in it. There are 3 other values that are important to know. If you are proficient, half proficient, rounded down, and you can do that, by the way, by setting the base proficiency down here, then you'll get a 0.49 as the dot proficiency. If you set it to half proficiency rounded up, you'll get a .5 out of there. And if you set it to double proficiency, you'll get a 2 out of it. That is, by the way, the other important fields I didn't go over was the base value and the base proficiency. Base value, I mean, it's essentially the same as the attribute. It's just the number before any effects are applied. It's just in 5e, the base value is always 0. Base proficiency, though, is just whether or not you're innately proficient in it. If you're building something from scratch, likelihood is you're not proficient in it. But let's say if you don't want to add every single language in 5e to your sheet, then these you would want to add to your sheet with base proficiency attached to them. Okay. A couple of other things that skills can have that attributes can't. They can have a passive bonus. So passive perception, very common in D&D. We have an effect here that just makes it show it's passive. It's just 10 plus its modifier. And if you parse into perception.passive bonus, you'll get 0. And the reason why is because there is no passive bonus. 10 plus 4 is equal to 14. But some items, I think there's like a cape or something that gives you a bonus only to your passive perception. Passive bonus will let you see that. Sheets or skills can also have something called conditional benefits. If I just pull up like a couple of these, someone's bound to have a conditional benefit. Let's find out. I'm back. I've decided to just manually make it because apparently none of the character sheets I have passive bonuses. So, or conditional benefits. So effect, we're going to call it conben example. We're going to have it be conditional benefit. I'll explain what all this is momentarily. This is a conben, and we're going to target stealth. create. Now stealth, when we click on it, it's got this little asterisk on it. And if we click on that, we can say, this is a con ben. This would be used for something like like you have advantage on checks against being put to sleep. That's not advantage on all checks. That's just advantage on checks against being put to sleep. You can't just give it advantage because otherwise that skill's always going to roll with advantage. But if you give it to but if you make it a con ben, then you get this asterisk, and you'll see. One thing I wanted to briefly mention is that effects that apply to ability scores that skills are based off of will sometimes propagate those effects down to the skills. What I mean by that is that, for example, if you make an effect that gives you advantage on intelligence, all the skills that are based off of intelligence will inherit that advantage. Okay, that's pretty much it for skills. Moving onwards to effects. Hey there, Editing John here. So if you'll remember, I recorded this video in 2 parts, and in between the day where I was recording, there was an update pushed that kind of broke some stuff. So I'm going to be intersplicing footage from the day before, so if the variable names and sheets change a bit, now you know why. Effects are how you modify numbers. Effects are the core of the Dicecloud engine. They change the values of attributes, skills, and calculations in a way that is transparent and auditable, keeping character sheets organized and understandable, even when using intricate homebrew rules on high-level characters. So I go over here, and I add an effect. And by the way, the common place to add effects is if you just click on something, you get children, plus it's going to suggest you add an effect here. Okay. Name, we've been over this. Value, you get it. It's the number that you're going to be operating with. So for example, if I have, let's say, a 15 strength up here, and I want to make that a 17, well then I'm going to want to add 2. And then I'm going to target by variable name, I'm going to target strength. Click on this, create. And notice, even though this is under charisma, because I targeted strength, strength went up to 17. Because we're targeting by variable name and not by ancestry targeting is something you can do, and we're going to get into that in a later video when I do a complicated homebrew. Even though it's the child of charisma, because we're var targeting and we're targeting the variable name of strength, it's going to just affect this, and it doesn't matter that it's the child of charisma. It doesn't need to be the child of strength is the point I'm trying to get across. No, you can do multiple things in here. We could also target dexterity. We'd also target specifically dexterity saves, and now all those things have +2 to them. The alternate thing you can do is you can tag target. Now, when you tag target, you can do all this fun Boolean stuff where you get or and not logic. What's within the first field is considered and logic. And I believe what's in the not field is considered NAND logic, but it might be NOR logic, and I'm not confident on this. I'll put a note in the description when I find out for sure. But you can target a whole bunch of things. So maybe I just wanted to give all of my ability checks +2, or I'd just do ability check. And this is just going to find every property on your sheet that has the ability check tag on it, and it's going to add 2. If you want to be super advanced too, by the way, you can specifically target a field. Remember, all these properties have tons of fields in them. If maybe some of them have multiple values. If we remember all the way back to actually, it's the spell slots. It's the number of spell slots you have and the level of spell slot. Well, if I want to add 2, how does it know which one I want to add to? You can target the field. And it's the same sort of notation which can be found on the documentation for what the variable name for those fields are. Notably, by the way, with tag targeting, right now you can only add. I'm going to pause for a moment because I remember there was a discussion that happened earlier today that I wanted to bring up specifically. Oh yeah, this was it. Within your effects, you can add dice values. So if you wanted to add 2 + 1d8 and have it roll 1d8 every time, you can see right there all my ability checks just changed because it's rolling the d8. you can do that. But when you're targeting by tag, then that D8 doesn't roll whenever you update your sheet. If you're targeting by variable name, whenever your sheet recalculates that part of itself, it's going to re-roll that D8, which is basically exactly what you want, which is just that, if you're adding plus D8 to I don't know, maybe some sort of wild magic thing, maybe your armor class changes. Then whenever your sheet recalculates because you took damage or whatever, then that 1d8 is going to reevaluate. When you target by tag, it doesn't evaluate that d8. Only when the thing that's receiving that tag targeted effect computes it when it's rolled. So you would use tag targeting mainly to target things like damage, like attack rolls, like attribute damage properties, mainly transient properties that are going to evaluate down that dice roll once they're called upon by a triggering property. If you're unfamiliar with that vocabulary, I suggest you go watch the second video right towards the end when I go over what all of that means. Okay, let's go back to the land of variables, and we can look at all of our operations. Our operations include base value. I talked about this a whole bunch earlier in the attribute section. This is just if the highest base value an attribute has is what it takes as its base value, and then it applies all other operations to it. Add is what you use for addition and subtraction. You would just add a negative number for subtraction. Multiplication is what you use for multiplication and division. You would just add you just multiply by the reciprocal for division. Minimum is what the minimum number can be. If effects would bring it below that number, it just boosts it right back up to its minimum. Maximum does the opposite. It can't go over that number. Set does both at the same time. Can't go below or above that number. It sets it to a very, very specific number, and nothing can change that, despite another set variable. And at that point, if you have multiple set variables, I believe it's the one furthest down on the tree. I'm going to check that really quick, because if it might be the highest one. Set. The greatest, I was wrong. It's not tree. It's not spatial. It is the highest value. The highest set value will be considered, and all other non-set effects will be ignored. Advantage, the value field gets grayed out because it doesn't matter what the value is. It's not even looking at this right now. Advantage just gives you advantage if you're rolling with it. So we're targeting super speed right now. If I make this a modifier, then we would get advantage on it. Right now, that's currently broken, but it should be fixed in the next update, so you're still going to need to actually click the advantage button, but theoretically, it would automatically apply advantage to it. Cool, got a nat 20, first roll. Next up, disadvantage. Same thing, it would just automatically apply the disadvantage one. Also, by the way, you can also target skills with this, so let's actually name this, as we called it var name. Do that. If we target var name, this one does work if I recall correctly. Yeah, you can see we actually get the little disadvantage thing, and it starts us out with disadvantage. That should also be happening for modifiers, but it's not right now. We're still in beta. Woo! That's advantage and disadvantage. Passive bonus. This is for if you have a passive score. We're giving it a passive bonus of +2. It's a +5 regularly, so 10 plus 5 is 15, +2 is 17. If you want to audit all of that, you just click on it. Fail. Makes it so that you automatically fail when you roll it. It's funny that you can still roll it, but it just does. You just do fail the roll. Conditional benefits we also went over before. These can apply to anything. So if I go over here to my speed, you can see now I have a con ben here. And that's it for effects. Effects have a few fields that are useful. Target field is what, for if we wanted to tag target, gets you this field. Target by tags is true if you have this button selected, and it's false if you have this button selected. Operation gets you the name of the operation you're using. And that's about it for effects. So, I'm going to wrap up the video here because I'm hungry and my dinner is ready, and it's been ready for... Oh, geez, this video ended up just as long as the last one. This one wasn't quite nearly as rambly, though. I got a lot more information conveyed in the same amount of time in this video. Plus, I'm going to need to edit it down a whole bunch. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm hoping to make another video pretty soon, going over more effects, or more properties. Hopefully going to get those out next week. But until then, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if this helped you, and more importantly, if you know someone who's trying to learn Dicecloud and is struggling to find the basics, please direct them towards this playlist. I'm really making this video with them in mind. I'm trying to keep it simple enough that everyone can follow on the basic videos, and then if they want to get into the nitty-gritty, they can watch these sort of property-specific videos. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate ya, and I'll see you next time. Bye.